According to the best players in the world, these are the best decks in the game. The Spring Masters Tour is finally here, and the decks have been posted, and I'm going to show you guys as many decks as I possibly can, but I'm also going to tell you guys how to keep yourself updated throughout the tournament, because not a lot of information has been posted, and I kind of had to, find a few things in order to figure out what is exactly going on with this tournament. So if you like this kind of content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified about any of our future updates. But before we dive into the decks, I'm going to show you guys the archetypes that are floating around right now. Just going to have to move my big old fat head. But what's going on here is that a lot of players have agreed that Death Knight is broken, Demon Hunter is broken, and Marakarog is broken. Who would have thought? But there are some other archetypes that are squeezing their way into here, and we will dive into every single one of these archetypes. Because I've got 15 decks that have different tech cards, different ideas in order to showcase what exactly is going on with some of these players' thought processes. Because I imagine a lot of you are surprised to not see a lot of Blood DK ruling the meta right now. That's right, I think Frost DK is actually much better than Blood DK in order to beat more decks that you will see in a tournament lineup. But in case you guys want to find more information regarding Hearthstone Esports, a good resource is sometimes, the HS Esports Twitter account. Although sometimes they don't have a bunch of information, so sometimes it's just better just to follow a lot of the players themselves. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind for me is Meati. Gotta love good old-fashioned Meat Man. So make sure that you try to follow some of these guys on actual Twitter accounts, and I will try to link as many of those in the description below. But the official Play Hearthstone website does have a guide in order for you to see all of the players that are competing, who is going to be casting, as well as the stakes. But one resource that I believe goes way beyond anything that is here right here is honestly, for anybody that wants the deck codes, I cannot recommend this website highly enough. Donkey.top is a community-driven website where you can find the most up-to-date Hearthstone information, from streamer decks to what's going on in local esports. And what's going on right here is all of the deck codes are already here on this website. So unfortunately, I cannot leave the deck codes in my description, and I'm not going to have any other links outside of this one right here, because you have Group A, Group B, Group C, and Group D, and hopefully this will be somewhat updated. And even if you want to go a step further, you can make a fantasy league. I mean, I had to log into my account, but you could actually make your own fantasy picks before the tournament starts, just for fun's sake. But all of the deck lists are right here. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the ones that are the most notable out of this distribution of decks. So let's go ahead and jump right into the deck lists. Everyone is pretty much deciding that Frost DK is the way to go, and almost every single one of these players has put in Puzik, the audio engineer, in the deck. And the reason why I believe this is in the deck is just because you are always sticking a minion on the board, so that way if you have a Rowdy fan, it's just going to stick onto the minion, it's going to go face, and then suddenly, 2 damage becomes 6, 4 damage becomes 8. That's a pretty large chunk of damage when you really think about it, because 6 is about a fifth of your HP. So when you also add on top Frostworm Furies as well as Might of Minithel, completely locking out gamers, it makes sense why this is the most popular deck in the format right now. And like I said, there aren't a lot of people that are really trying to diversify with builds, but this build in particular was really interesting from Hemlock because he's running a Mermy. Is this the way to go? I mean, I don't know. It's another reason to get Rowdy fan value, and if you think about it, it's also 2 corpses for Mara Manipulator, and it is technically an undead minion, so it works with Nerubian Vizier in order to give you consistent discounted discover cards. You do sacrifice Barons for it, and I don't know what else is being sacrificed in the early game, but you still got Puzik, so I think I've even started running this card. It kind of makes sense. Maybe I'm not super sold on it 100% yet, but all of the Master Store players seem to agree that this is the way to run Frost DK. And now if we take a look at the Blood DK list, there's a lot of different things happening here from 2 different players, and we'll go ahead and get to the other deck here in a second. But Meati is going with the general idea of, just slap in Prince Renathal and be greedy as hell with your deck. There's a lot of pretty interesting cards in here that I don't think are really that common nowadays, but I have been seeing these kind of ideas creeping their way onto the ladder. First and foremost, Dirty Rat. Apparently Meat Man says that the Dirty Rat is the way to go, but they're also running Paparazzi. Paparazzi is a card that I really don't see all too much in Blood DK, but it kind of makes sense as a way to find specific cards. Like say you can find a Ziliax, you can find a Marogar. I don't really know what specifically you're trying to find off of this, but sometimes clutch legendaries can go a really long distance. Just ask Paladin, for example. But in any other case, you still got typical cards in the deck. But one other really weird card in this list is the Deathbringer Surfing. Not sure what this is trying to put itself into, but maybe it's trying to make itself stronger into an aggro deck, just so that way you have consistent taunts, and since you have a lot of lifesteal, it's really not too difficult for you. And maybe it's another way of protecting Screaming Banshee. That can kind of make sense, so that way you can provide a nice defense for this card as you build up the value. But Meatman's got a pretty solid idea here for what Blood DK actually is been known for. While on the other hand, Levik, the only other person that brought Blood DK, did not bring Renathal and brought a 30-card version and seems to be focusing more on disruption more than anything else. Like, the only reason why I'm saying that is because there are Dirty Rats and there's Patchwork and there is a Zola in the deck. So I imagine that Levik is trying to make a Blood DK that destroys Tony Druid, and Tony Druid is about half of the field, I believe. So I think it's not a necessarily bad meta read, but unfortunately, this strategy may not pay off as well for Levik as he would have hoped. But the biggest question here is the consistent card draw better than running extra HP with Renathal, because you're gonna have, you know, your Vampiric Bloods when you need them. You're going to have your Blood Boils in the situations where you really want to Blood Boil on 5. So maybe Levik is onto something with a 30-card version of Blood DK. Miracle Rogue was almost brought by every single player, but the decks are all over the place, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But this seems to be the standard Miracle Rogue that a lot of people brought. You know, just slap in Sinstone, put in Queen, you're absolutely fine. You don't need Draka. Some people are saying it's just way too slow, but there are some players that are saying that Draka is the way to go. reqvam, for example, is the guy that's saying, you know what, why not just put in Draka and also, you know, Shadow Step Colton Neophyte a whole bunch of times, so that way you just lock out the opponent in 2 turns. However, I'm still not 100% sold on Draka personally, just because it might be a little bit too clunky. And the thing I don't like about this card is when you're trying to, like, when you've already, like, exhausted a lot of resources, you pumped in everything into the Sinstone, and then suddenly you find Draka off the top instead of finding something else. So a lot of players are saying that Draka might still be the way to go. While other players like Saudi are saying, you wanna know what, why don't we put Mic Drop into Miracle Rogue and then also put an ETC and fit in a Breakdance, and Eviscerate, and a Sunfury Clergy. Sunfury Clergy is also finding its way into some other lists, by the way. I'm not going to showcase every single Miracle list, obviously, but there's a lot of players that have completely different lists for Miracle Rogue, so this is why I'm highly suggesting that you guys check out the Donkey website, because it is an extremely good resource to use in order to make sure that you're up to date on what's going on here. But this deck also drops Queen, by the way. Not 100% sold on that, but maybe Saudi is just trying to end the game faster than other people are. But the last rogue list that we have on here is not a Miracle Rogue. This is the only person, I believe, the only person that did not bring Miracle Rogue and instead brought this weird hybrid, like, Dagger Pirate Rogue. I mean, I think it's just all in on Pirates, but it also does have, you know, like the Dagger synergies where you're running Harmonic Hip Hop, Shadow Demise, and Air Guitarist. The only thing that you don't really have in this deck is Shadow Step, but it makes sense to cut it in this particular version because you need to focus more on, well, building a board and drawing out your deck, and Shadow Step is more of a value card, and this deck is not really concerning itself with value. So, you know, arguments for Shadow Step going into every single rogue deck, suddenly, haha, you got some fodder against that if you are a Shadow Step stan. One day we will get you. But in any case, I think that Aggro Pirate Rogue does have a lot of potential, and in this field that is being represented right now, it seems to be that people are trying to kill people faster rather than trying to stop game plans. But speaking of the decks that stop game plans, Relic Demon Hunter is still fitting its way into this meta, and it makes sense because it's one of the only decks that has, like, insane removal potential as well as lifesteal in order to deny these kind of aggro decks, while also somewhat being its own pseudo aggro deck itself because of the high rolls off of Relics. And if you want my honest opinion, I believe that Relics might be on a chopping block for potential nerfs. Like, I don't know what exactly needs to be nerfed from this deck, but Relic Demon Hunter is absolutely pulling numbers right now, not only at Top Legend, but of course in this tournament. However, there is another Demon Hunter deck, unfortunately, so not a lot of people are really sold on Relic. In fact, Outcast Demon Hunter is more popular than Relic Demon Hunter, and I just believe that's because people at Top Legend really like this deck, because it's one of those decks to where if you don't have the very perfect clears to stop it, there's just not a lot that you can do in order to prevent the damage that Hell-There Dark Raven can provide with the deck. And there's another list that we have to showcase here that really sells me on why people are trying to just make the thickest boards possible and just go for this pseudo bloodlust. Levik has decided, why not just try to make a gigantic board full of 1/1 minions, so that way when you make more 1/1 minions, you have an entirely buffed board thanks to Hellavera Darkraven. Like, this card is just an insanely useful card that might become extremely scary once we have, like, the 100% optimized lists. Once we get some nerfs in, but if this card survives some nerfs, there is some really scary potential out of, you know, just sticking a board to the point where some pro players are literally just fitting in Hawkstrider Rancher. I don't even know if this is the right way to go, and in all honesty, I kind of have my doubts about this particular strategy, but I just had to give this a particular shout out because fitting this into Outcast Demon Hunter is kind of unheard of right now. And following behind Demon Hunter is Undead Priest, and unfortunately, it's kind of the same thing all across the board, except that this is like the only interesting build, and I believe this is from Casie, if I remember correctly. So Casie is thinking, you know what, why not just fit in a Bone Flinger in the deck, because, you know, it just makes sense. You're always on the board with undead minions. You have cards like Banshee that can make this into a 4/4, depending on how your curve works, and that's just really powerful in all honesty, and I just don't like what this deck is doing, because this is just another minion that works for Rotting Necromancer, and now that Shadow Priest lost a lot of tools, this is just kind of the way to go, and I hate to say it, it works. Like, I've seen this deck a lot on ladder, and I think I've lost to Shadow Priest almost every single time that I've seen it, just because this deck has insane burst turns that a lot of times players undervalue and often underestimate. But I don't believe that Masters Tour players are underestimating what Priest can do right now. And the deck that I thought would be leading the pack of the Masters Tour is actually one of the least brought archetypes all across the board. But Jarla is still saying that Tony Druid is a good deck to bring, and ETC is the way to go with cards like Crazed Alchemist, Photographer Fizzle, and a Smothering Starfish. I imagine that this is mostly for, like, you know, the mirror running the Starfish in order to stop the big taunts from automatically winning the game. Crazed Alchemist in order to obviously switch your taunts to be game winning. But the one thing I don't like about ETC is how sometimes it feels like it's unnecessary since you just win with the gigantic taunts or the jailer turn anyway. And I really don't know why we're running Fizzle particularly in this deck. Maybe we want to get another Anubricon, get 2 gigantic Anubricon turns, so that way we can go for like a big taunts. That way big taunts don't work, we can just go for Jailer into Tony. And I've even seen some people go so far as to put Tony into the ETC. Like, Tony Druid is all over the place, man. It's just a really whack archetype, and I love what's happening with this particular deck. But there's another person that also brought Tony Druid, which is pretty representative of how people are thinking of this archetype at the highest level of competitive Hearthstone. Mosher still finds its way into the Masters Tour, and unfortunately there's not a lot of people that are sold on this particular interaction anymore, and I really don't understand why. Because if your opponent plays the big taunts, then you just mosh it. They're just gone. You don't have to run any fancy ETC silence or anything like that. You could just, you know, get into a good old-fashioned mosh pit and just bump into people and let your lawyer take care of everything, dude. It just works. But this is the list that a lot of people have been playing with this Druid deck, and I just don't see it going anywhere because it's super powerful. And believe it or not, the worst class in the game is actually not running at the end of the pack in terms of representation. Aggro Mage makes a pretty good, healthy, appearance in this Masters Tour, and this is really the list that everyone has been settled on. I don't believe there's a lot of people that have gone in a different particular direction. But I've been playing this deck a little bit recently, and decisions are extremely important in a deck like this, even though it does look very simple, where you just, you know, play Arcane Worm on 1, play Cosmic Keyboard on 2, and then maybe Coin Cold Case on 3. Sometimes you're in a position with this deck where you have to play very specifically, and Masters Tour players are probably going to be able to showcase you guys how to really play this deck at the top of Legend ranks. But unfortunately, Mage isn't as popular as a lot of people would like to see it right now, but at least it's making its way into the Masters Tour, unlike Warrior. Yeah, sorry, Warrior mains. Warrior's not the last deck we're going to be showing you. The deck that is running the pack with exactly one person bringing the archetype, like, this is it. This is apparently the pure Paladin list according to the Masters Tour players, because all the other lists are just not worth it, or this deck is easily disrupted. But I'll tell you what right now, like, Disco Maul. Disco Maul is just an insane card. Mulligan for this, draw it, play it on turn 1, coin it out, who cares? You can just win games with this card automatically, and this list really isn't doing anything all too challenging, but it does have Curator for card draw, and it still has the Blood Crusader Countess for the consistent random legendaries as early as possible. I think that pure Paladin just doesn't really do the greatest into this particular field because you're expecting to see a lot of Frost DK. So I imagine that with this particular build, this guy is going to be banning Frost DK almost every single time. But if you believe that you aren't going to see a lot of Death Knight on the ladder, then pure Paladin is still a very scary deck to encounter nonetheless. And in the hands of pro player, let's just see what comes out of the Countess. But those are the most interesting Masters Tour decks that I wanted to showcase you guys. And again, if you want to see all of those lists and if you want to get those deck codes, go ahead and check out donkey.top in order to get all that information, in order to, you know, check out the Fantasy League. You know, maybe you want to support or root for one of your Hearthstone, one of your favorite Hearthstone players, and this is just one way that you can do that. It's another way of being able to interact with people. All the Twitter accounts to all the players are going to be down below, so that way you guys can try to check out their updates, because that's just the best way to get information on a lot of players that are going to be competing. Some players even have permission to stream their perspective, albeit it will be at a delayed rate, so you can't interact with them during the tournament. Obviously, you don't want that to happen. You want them to think and to make the best plays possible. So all that information will hopefully be down below in order to give you guys the most comprehensive guide to Hearthstone Esports. Hopefully, I was able to give you guys a little bit of inspiration on a new way to play archetypes that you've already been familiar with, maybe even a little bit sick of, but Hearthstone Esports has always got a special place in my heart, and I want to try and share it with all of you guys. So thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and make sure to check out your favorite Masters Tour players as they're competing in the tournament. Thank you so much, and we'll see you for the next video.